Hello everybody, welcome to another roadmap template review. This time we are taking things up a notch with some developer roadmaps. Previously we covered careers like HR, project management and digital marketing, and it was mostly about roles and corporate, like how a beginner can rise up the ranks to leadership and upper management. This time we are focusing on learning roadmaps that are based around software development, starting off with a front-end developer roadmap. So I'm right here in this workspace hub, and as you can tell, this one is a doozy. It's almost got 63 nodes and 69 links or connections, and we start at the top and go a long way down. So let's not delay this further and get right into it. So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and let's do a quick fly around. We start at the top by learning the very basics of programming. This includes things like Git for version control and terminal commands. So, like if you're an absolute beginner, you can start here. Then we move into more web development based knowledge, things like understanding the role of HTML and CSS and how web pages work and respond to devices. Then we get into the more front end aspect, sorry, which learning the basics of React and how to navigate pages, process functions, and other variables. Then we keep moving down the ladder, learning to improve the UI, manage user input, and improve the user experience, while also doing some minor projects and checkpoints along the way. Then we get into more advanced topics like state management, performance, and more UX improvements for things like accessibility, loading, and more. And finally, we get into do a couple of projects, a few milestones and checklists to build a few projects like weather apps, to-do lists, and all that to like get a good grasp of everything that is required from a front-end developer. And finally, we reach the end, which is becoming a job-ready front-end developer that's able to handle almost any front-end project. Of course, this is my first advanced roadmap, so I want to create something with a lot of nodes and branches. So, and also, if you have a roadmap that you want to create and modify, check out skilltreesapp.com and try it for free. So with that said, let's dive deeper into these roadmap. So we start at the top. Sorry, this should say front-end developer. I'll change this one later because I initially started out making a full stack and had to shave things down a bit. So we start at the top with the foundations. This is, if you're an absolute beginner, this is where you would want to start. We start with unlocking the foundation skills needed, and then we unlock all these skills which we can go through one by one. I'm not going to go through each and every skill here because that can be tedious. Instead, I'll drop the link for the template in the description so you can check it out and even create your own roadmaps. So the fundamentals cover everything you need: programming basics, Git, version control, and ends with a checkpoint and milestone. Basically, if you can set up a simple project with JavaScript and use basic Git commands to push, pull, and to a cloud repository, you're good. And next, we move on to the web basics. This is where students can start diving deeper into the web development aspect by learning how HTML and CSS works, how to optimize web pages for different devices, change the web page dynamically, which is called DOM manipulation, and also how to base the first stage of using simple APIs to fetch data. So basically, students can learn about the web basics if they can build a responsive website. So for now, a static website with just one page is enough for now, and being able to deploy it on a hosting service of their choice. You can always do this for free on sites like Vercel and GitHub. And then we get into the good stuff, what it actually means being a front-end developer. This front-end path has several modules that students will need to learn step by step to get a good handle on how front-end development works for complete apps and websites. The first stage is the core layer. Here you learn things like page routing, which is basically navigation between pages, the basics of React, modern JavaScript, responding to events, and managing states, and also things like creating reusable components and props, which is basically like variables you pass into a function. After that, your checkpoint for passing these core framework layers is when you can build a multi-page website or app with good navigation and dynamic data. And then you can deploy a front-end only site, which will give you a good idea of the entire process of building and deploying. Most students usually create websites for like an e-commerce page, streaming service, etc., but without the backend, so it's basically like a storefront. After that, the next phase is diving deeper into UI and interaction. This is where you polish things to improve the user experience. Here you learn how to use conditional rendering to display things based on different states. Like if a user clicks or hovers on a product in an e-commerce page, it should have a pop-up or some other UI that shows extra details or information. Other than that, you can also learn how to set up forms for user input and how to validate them for different purposes, like validating passwords or validating data indifferently depending on your app's situations. And loading and error states. So they are also important since you don't want to confuse users, and also give some feedback on when they are waiting for a process or if the app would run into an error. So the checkpoint here is, can you build an interactive UI with real data? Here students build something like a weather app, calculator, or to-do list. So it proves they can handle user input, process the inputs, and provide value to a user while also improving their experience. The next phase is short but important, state management. State management is basically handling data between different pages and situations. A super simple example is tracking a toggle, whether it's tracking the toggle is turned on or off, and then highlighting this on the toggle, and maybe also using that information to display other UI or do some other processes. The first skill is to learning to handle local states. So that's managing state data within one web page. So like I mentioned, tracking the value of a toggle. Then it's global state management. This is where you track things like which page the user is on while they are browsing. Maybe they are in the home page, maybe the about page, and then using that information for things like highlighting the page button in the nav bar and so on. Also, when something is loading, we can change a state to indicate the loading status, and when it's complete, we can have the loader close and also display some success message, etc. So state management is super important, especially for front end, because you can improve the UX and do more cool stuff with it. We are almost nearing the finish line, so at this stage you would have a pretty solid idea of front-end development and basically how any app runs. It will also give you an inkling of how the backend comes into play and how everything else falls together. So even if you don't understand exactly how backend and DevOps works, you'll still know like this is what should happen from the backend or other services. So the next phase is advanced concepts. Here we have some mandatory skills and some optional ones. The optional ones are learning TypeScript and animations. TypeScript is now becoming the norm because with it, functions and variables you need to have you use need to have a type or interface. So basically they need to be declared previously. So saying something like this function only takes in an integer and it only gives out a string value. It should give nothing else. So TypeScript is important when things scale up because you're building that solid foundation of having perfectly defined functions and variables, so the program knows what type or variables should always go through. Animations are, well, animations. They're fun to look at, but optional for now. And then the advanced mandatory basics, which you can see here. It includes learning how to optimize for performance, the basics, and splitting code so you don't have to load your entire app's functions from the first page and have a long loading time, and also have it stuttering, all the time, because you always try to show everything at once, show or process everything at once. Lazy loading, which is what you see when you scroll through a long list of items and they only load the ones directly under it. So it gives users the feeling of scrolling a long list, but you're only populating the items just below that. So everything is smooth and all that. Also basic testing and creating functions to test features, and creating automated tests. And of course, optimizing for accessibility. This is more than just adding a meta description for your images. At this stage, you basically know everything about front-end development, and the next stage is getting some projects done so you can actually be ready to take on jobs or build complete apps yourself. So the first milestone here is building something practical that interacts with user data and provides a lot of value. This can be a simple calculator, to-do list, etc. Not just something like a weather app, although if the weather app does ask the user to input their location, then it's kind of okay, but you can probably do better. And then the next project would be learning to build a dashboard UI which manages a lot of data, something like a sales dashboard for a shop, but not too complex, of course. The idea is that you learn to integrate different elements like tables and charts into a well defined structure, and also keep it responsive for bonus points. So, and there's another milestone, building a portfolio website to highlight your skills and show your contact information. But before we go into this portfolio website, we have two checkpoints: learning how to create a design from Figma or similar app, and also having the know-how to structure a project so it's scalable and doesn't break easily. Of course, these can be difficult to master, especially the structuring part, since it can vary from project to project. But as long as you understand the basics and know which parts take time to build and how to build everything efficiently, and you plan everything with a long-term plan, should be fine. And finally, we get to the end. With all of the above skills and experiences, it's very safe to say that you can now be job ready for front-end development. You can build apps that can ship, work with different services, structure a project properly. So at this stage, you can start applying for jobs or building your own websites professionally if need be. Okay, everybody, so thanks for sticking around. This was a big roadmap, and it would have been bigger if I included the backend and made it into a full stack roadmap, which is what I originally intended to. Maybe I'll fork this and create a new roadmap with the backend and DevOps elements to make it a full stack developer roadmap. Also, if you want to create similar roadmaps or fork this one and modify it to fit your goals, I'll link the template in the description.